Hello, everybody. This is Dean Matthew again, and I am here with Rosemary Braxton. Hello, Rosemary.
Hello, how are you this evening?
I'm good. Rosemary has been a member of Trinity on and off since the 60s, but solidly since the 70s. Is that right?
That's about right.
Yes. And you come to us after having spent some time in the Apostolic Church and also the Assemblies of God Church.
That's correct.
Yeah. Well, that's close to my heart because I spent some time in a Pentecostal church in England. So I know what that was like. And you were just telling me a second ago that it's interesting seeing how different people read the same Bible so differently.
That's right. It was an eye opener.
Was it? Okay. So what was that journey like traveling around all those different churches?
Well, it made me see the Bible in very black and white terms, looking
Okay.
at it from a Pentecostal point of view. There's no gray areas, no maybes. Everything is either it's this way or it's that way. It was very black and white.
Yeah.
Um, it seemed to me that people that were coming from a very rough background, off the streets, from or giving up very difficult habits, found that it seemed that that really worked well for them to
Okay. Yeah.
things see things in black and white. That it was the scriptures, you either do this or you don't do this. That's right, and that's wrong. You don't drink. They didn't. You don't drink. You don't even drink a glass of wine. You drink water and milk and juice, and
But
that's it. So it
but
was very different to see the world that way.
yes, but that wasn't enough for you. You didn't want to stay in that.
No, I didn't.
And you also told me a little while ago that you found yourself feeling more comfortable in the Episcopal Church. So what was it about the Episcopal Church that you felt comfortable about and that you needed from your biblical studies?
First of all, it was home. It was what I grew up in. It was what I was accustomed to.
Yeah.
I found that in terms of the pulpit, that it was much more stimulating listening to a sermon in the Episcopal Church than hearing everything in black and white. This is either right or wrong from a Pentecostal Assembly of God pulpit. That it was just I enjoyed the sermons more,
Okay.
and I felt they were more meaningful to me in terms of I felt there were more things to do within the Episcopal Church. I was involved in the Episcopal Urban Caucus
Yeah.
and Stephen Ministry. There
Yeah.
are a lot of more things to involve yourself in to apply in your Christian life than there were in the churches that I attended.
Well, I'm really glad you're here, Rosemary. Thank you. Um, but I wanted to go back to your earlier life. You didn't always live in California. You moved here from, was it Mississippi?
Yes, we moved here from Mississippi.
How old were you then?
I was in my late teens when
Right.
we moved here from Mississippi.
So you have experienced childhood in the deep south,
I
in
did.
a time when it was difficult living there as a black woman, a black young woman, I'm imagining.
It was. There were most of the in Mississippi, most of my friends that I knew of shopped in the black section of town.
Okay.
They went to like for dresses, you went to Lulabelle's Fashion Center or another. I can't remember the name of the other shop, clothing shop. But people pretty much for a lot of their shopping and eating were around in the black districts to avoid the white segregated systems. However, we did shop there for groceries and the grocery markets and things like that.
Yeah. And before we started recording, you were telling me about a case that happened when somebody tried to register to vote. And it was after you'd moved to California, but you were watching it carefully on the television. And I wonder if you'd tell me about that.
Yes, that was during the Democratic Convention, the 1964 Democratic
Yeah.
Convention. There was a group that came called the Freedom Party,
Yeah.
and Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the people that was speaking. They had asked to be seated at because there were no blacks in the white delegation Democratic Party from the state of Mississippi.
Okay.
And the Mississippi Freedom Party said, we are part of the state of Mississippi and we are not being treated like first class citizens, and we demand to be seated instead of the Democratic Party. And then Fannie Lou Hamer was selected to give the testimony about why they should be seated
Okay.
instead of the all white Democratic Party that was the official party of the state of Mississippi. And she spoke of going to Rulesville. She lived in Rulesville, Mississippi, and she had gone to register to vote. And she and I think it was about 18 of them who went.
Mm-hmm.
And they got there, and they were told, they were given pages to fill out, which they did. And then they were told that that they didn't pass the literacy exam, they couldn't register to vote. So they left, and she went back to where she was a sharecropper and picked cotton and was fired.
Mm-hmm.
So then their SNCC workers came down, and she learned about representation and on all of these things, and how that's what she learned, that there was a Democratic Party and that the blacks weren't represented and blacks weren't voting, and that, and et cetera, and started the Mississippi Freedom Party as a result of that.
Yeah.
And registered to vote. She was fired for registering to vote, even though she was the only person who could read and write.
She managed to register to vote in the end.
She was registered to vote in the end, but she was badly beaten in the process and jailed. And she testified about how she was beaten and jailed in her attempt to register to vote before the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson was watching this on television.
Yeah.
He interrupted her testimony with a presidential announcement. So they cut her testimony off on all of the stations, and he came on, and his announcement was that this was the 9th month anniversary of the death of the shooting of John F. Kennedy in Texas. And
that was
that's all he said.
Yeah. So that he just wanted them to cut the cameras on her testimony.
He wanted the cameras on her testimony to be cut off, but it ended up backfiring because all of the networks had this horrible testimony of how she was beaten, how she was fired, and all of these things that happened to her was played over and over again on different stations after that.
Oh, so wait, he tried to get the testimony cut, but actually it got played more in the end?
It got played more in the end. He did cut it off while she was testifying. So when they came back to the covering the Democratic, what was the testimonies that were going on, when they came back to that, her testimony was over. So what the networks did was play it from the beginning to the end several times so people heard the whole testimony.
Okay. So I'm confused, and this is my history, an American history, but Lyndon Johnson was responsible for the Civil Rights Act, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He was responsible for passing the Voting Rights Civil Rights Act and a lot of other things that were in the Civil Rights Act, so, which cost him politically.
So what do you think of him? Do you think of him as somebody who was stopping people seeing this person's testimony, or somebody who was trying to fight for civil rights? Is he a bit of a mixed bag?
Yeah, I guess you could call him a mixed bag.
Okay.
I think that he made, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
trying to interrupt Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony.
Yeah.
It was a triumph. Passing the 1964 Civil Rights Act was a good thing that he did.
Yeah.
And that's when the South, the white South, left the Democratic Party and became Republican.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So my mind wants to go in two different directions. I'm going to ask both questions at once and we'll see which way we go. One thing I was wondering is if at that time you were experiencing discrimination as a Black woman in America.
I was in school.
Okay.
Like at California State University.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. I wrote a paper for someone, and that person got an A on the paper, and I got a C on the one I wrote. I wrote both of them.
Yeah.
And the one I wrote for the white person, they got an A on it. I got a C on the one I wrote for myself. I also had an experience where I was standing in line first.
Okay.
And all of the white students came and formed two lines, neither of them behind me. And the person, when the window opened to begin registration, they refused to wait on me because I wasn't standing in either line. And nobody spoke up to say that I was there first, and they formed two separate lines.
Okay.
But so I had discrimination in my classes, how I was graded by professors.
Yeah.
And there was one teacher that I was dating an African student from Uganda.
Uh-huh.
And she had invited him to her home. And he was from a very influential family in Uganda.
Yeah.
A high status family. And so he took me to something where she was, and she was so angry that I was with him, you know, because.
So it was okay because he came from Uganda and from a high family in Uganda, but because you were an American Black woman, that was not okay?
She felt that this is a white female instructor there. She didn't like that I was dating somebody, I guess she felt that was above me socially.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know why she didn't like it. That's the only thing I could think of. But she resented me being at this affair with him.
Yeah. Rosemary, what did it feel like when everyone was going around you in the line?
Well, when that happened, I what it felt like to me was I refused to get in either one of these lines they have started. Yeah. They're not going to. They know that they should have stood behind me in the line, and they haven't. And I refuse to get into one of these lines that these white students have started. Yeah. So I felt defiant, like I was not going to get in that line, even if it meant that I was denied service, which it did. I didn't get in either one of those lines. I just went back later and registered. But
you had to leave and come back later?
Yes. Yeah. I just refused to support that system.
Yeah.
That was discriminating against me. Yeah.
Let's just pay attention to what happened. You stood first in the line and people formed the line around you, and the person at the window just assumed that was the legitimate line, even though you got there first. They refused to acknowledge that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So fast forwarding to today, is it any better?
Well, this same sort of thing happens at deli counters today.
Yeah.
You can be standing. I have experience walking up to a deli counter. Nobody's there to wait on anyone. They're back in the back doing something or other. So you're out there looking at the counter, deciding what you wanted. And then when the person comes up while I'm standing there waiting, a white person may come up, and then another white person, and they began to form a line behind the white person that came up after me.
Yeah.
And so then when the person comes out, they usually say, who was next?
Yeah.
They say, who's next? And I say, I'm next. And so they just wait on me.
Yeah.
And that's the way they get around it. Now they don't go to the line. They just come out and say, who's next? but it's not uncommon for that to happen still today.
So, Rosemary, what you're saying is that the same thing still happens. People form a line around you, but you're still using the same determination as you always had. And it's kind of perhaps you're managing to get served now in the way that you didn't before.
That's correct.
Yeah, but people are still forming other lines.
That still happens.
Yeah. What else do you think about where we are politically nowadays in terms of race in the US and some of the recent political complications?
I think it's overall it's safer to be Black in America than it was when I was a child. You don't hear of as many people being lynched as you did when I was growing up.
What about the instances of police violence against young black men?
I think that pretty much has stayed the same.
Right.
I don't think that has changed very much. And I think it's a caste system. I think that's the way they stay middle class. They're not going to be middle class if there's nobody in jail for them to be the guards of, or to be the wardens of,
Mm-hmm.
or the judge of, or the clerk in the judge's office. It's sort of keeping the way a lot of whites keep middle class by
Right.
locking up young Black men,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Do you think that the recent elections have have held people apart in terms of race? Do you think that race has really featured in the recent election cycles?
I think it has been, which surprised me
Yeah.
to the uh, in terms of this last election, where about half of the whites voted for the current administration and most of the minorities, and then about half of the whites voted for the losing ticket. I thought that was very interesting. It said to me that the white advantage, having an advantage of white skin, was more important to half of the white population than Christian values and democracy. I had not expected to see that.
Yeah. You were talking to me before about the fact that we needed to return to a moral spiritual base and get right with ourselves. And that if white supremacy is more important than democracy or morality, then that's a real problem.
I think so. I think that is the big problem in this country, that we're losing our Christian values, and democracy is not as precious to a large percentage of the people as having the advantage of white skin.
Yeah.
I think that is a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah. When you say Christian values, what I really love is that you're also talking about good, thoroughgoing Episcopal Christian values. And you're not talking about the black and white Christian values that you went to find in the Pentecostal church, but there's something about Episcopalian values that you really think of as important in our modern country.
Yes, I think the Black and people, to me, in the churches that I attended, judge things that only God could judge.
Yeah.
The things that they could judge about themselves, they weren't judging. They were more interested in judging what God judges about people, instead of getting right with what they could get right about themselves, which was very interesting to me.
Yeah. What does an Episcopalian set of Christian values mean to you?
Well, what I like better about the Episcopal Church, and I don't know that they're Episcopalian Christian values, as the Bible says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Uh-huh.
Put others before yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, what does God require of you? But
Yeah.
to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. I think that's preached from the pulpit.
Micah 6:8.
Right. I think that's preached from the pulpit. And I think that's what God is more interested in that than he is in how long your skirt is, or how short your skirt is, or how much lipstick you have on, or how much rouge you have on, or some of the other things that people are judging.
Yeah. Thank you, Rosemary. That's interesting. You've reflected back to me some of the values of Trinity and church, particularly with that Micah 6:8 quote that other people have mentioned to me, and I feel like it's deeply embedded in the consciousness of the cathedral, and I love that.
That's good.
Rosemary, is there anything else you'd like to say to the people of Trinity this Black History Month by way of closing?
I would just like to say that I'm glad that we talked about Absalom Jones. He was a great man. He
Yeah.
also worked when the whites left in 1793, when they left Philadelphia, and
Yeah.
he's only been freed 6 years because of the yellow fever plague. He's he was one of the people, along with Richard Allen, who nursed the yellow fever victims and set up uh, and buried them and did all of that hard work. And so I just want to say that let's remember that about him too.
Yeah.
That in at these COVID times, that he would have been a person that was looking after the COVID people, or the people that weren't getting the shots, making sure they got the shots. He was looking at the least among those who needed the most help.
Um, was my attempt to tell some of the story of Absalom Jones with my puppet last weekend okay?
I thought it came out okay, but I think you missed the yellow fever part.
Yellow fever, and I guess I'm either fishing for a compliment or I'm looking for validation. But
You,
um,
I want to validate what you did.
it was okay? Okay. I'm glad. And we are going to celebrate Absalom Jones this Saturday morning at 9 a.m. When I celebrate the Eucharist for the communion drive-through in the alleyway behind the church. So please tune in 9 a.m. on Saturday morning for Absalom Jones.
I
Uh,
certainly will.
that would be great. Rosemary, thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for asking me, and I hope I said something helpful.
I believe you did. I just really think it's great for us to talk, for people to get to know your story, your experience, and to maybe reflect on their own experience of being in the world, but with some of your insights in mind. So thank you.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless you.